In the wild, untamed lands of the Oregon Territory during the mid-1800s, the journey west was brutal. Families packed their lives into wagons and set out in search of new beginnings, chasing the promise of land, freedom, and hope. The Oregon Trail was a lifeline and a death sentence. Starvation, disease, weather, and violence claimed thousands. So when weary travelers saw a church rising out of the trees, its steeple silhouetted against the endless sky, they didn't hesitate. They called it a blessing, a miracle, a place to rest, to pray, to feel safe again. That church was the Sacred Heart Chapel, a modest wooden structure with a hand-painted sign and a crooked cross that leaned slightly in the wind. Smoke curled from its chimney. Children's laughter echoed faintly from behind it. A vegetable garden thrived along one side. It looked perfect because it was meant to. But perfection was the trap. The Sacred Heart Chapel, nestled near a bend in the trail and just off a river crossing, was run by the Grayson family. To passers-by, they seemed like kind-hearted missionaries. They offered warm food, clean water, medical help, and scripture. They wore simple clothes, spoke gently, offered beds to sleep in and fire to gather around. And yet, no one who stayed ever made it to their destination. It didn't happen all at once. At first, a missing family here, a lost merchant there, easily explained away. The trail was dangerous. People vanished. Records were poor. But slowly, rumors started. Stories passed between campfires. Whispers that some people who entered that little chapel were never seen again. What the pioneers didn't know was that the Grayson family wasn't providing shelter. They were providing slaughter. At the head of the family was Elijah Grayson, a self-proclaimed preacher with fiery eyes and a voice that could silence a room. His sermons were said to be powerful, comforting, and terrifying in equal measure. His wife, Miriam, soft-spoken and deeply devout, handled the sick and the elderly. Their children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, were polite, well-mannered, and always smiling. But it was all theater. Each member of the Grayson family had a role to play, a way to earn the trust of guests while quietly preparing them for death. It wasn't about rage or impulse. It was planned, measured, efficient. They would wait until their guests were fed, warmed, and vulnerable, then kill them in the dead of night, often without a sound. No screams, no blood trails, no survivors. Some were poisoned. Some were suffocated with linen cloth. Some were taken to pray and never returned. The next day, the Graysons would carry on like nothing happened. They would bury the bodies in the back fields or stack them beneath the floorboards of the church itself. And when the next group of travelers came along, it all started again. What's most terrifying is that no one suspected them. In a time when religious faith was sacred and the frontier was ruled by trust and necessity, the Graysons had built the perfect disguise. Who would question a preacher? Who would suspect a church? They hid behind Bibles, behind hymns, behind tears and prayers. And it worked for nearly 36 years. From 1852 to 1888, it's estimated that over 800 people vanished after passing by the Sacred Heart Chapel. Many were families. Some were soldiers. A few were missionaries themselves. None were ever reported found. The Oregon Trail was already dangerous. The chapel just ensured they never even had a chance. And the land remembers. Even today, those who walk through that area speak of a strange silence, as if the ground itself is holding its breath. Some hikers claim to hear faint singing, even when alone. Others say the trees lean inward, as if shielding secrets they dare not speak aloud. But it all started with a church in the woods, a family with kind smiles, and a cross that pointed not toward heaven, but toward mass murder. To the travelers of the Oregon Trail, the Grayson family were angels sent by God. A kind preacher and his gentle family offering food, prayer, and safety to those who had none. But behind the carefully polished image, the Graysons were something far worse than thieves or murderers. They were hunters of the desperate, and they had created the perfect snare. Elijah Grayson, the patriarch, wasn't ordained by any church. He was self-declared, a man of striking presence, with a voice that could lull or lash depending on the moment. He wore black robes, carried a worn Bible, and spoke in parables so convincingly that even seasoned travelers found themselves kneeling for prayer by the end of their meal. He had charisma, yes, but it was his conviction that made him dangerous. Elijah didn't think he was evil. He believed he was doing God's work. After the Civil War, with lawlessness spreading across the frontier, Elijah preached a doctrine of holy separation, a belief that only a chosen few deserved to inherit God's new kingdom in the West. The rest, he claimed, were wandering souls who could be cleansed only through sacrifice. That sacrifice came through blood. His wife, Miriam Grayson, played the role of the gentle matron. She wore plain clothes, sang hymns softly to herself, and offered tea laced with laudanum or belladonna. Guests never suspected her, especially women, who felt safe in her company. But Miriam was just as complicit. She chose which children to spare a peaceful death and which ones to leave for Elijah's final judgment. They raised 4 children. Samuel, the oldest son, tall, soft-spoken, often the one to greet visitors and feed their horses. Nathaniel, quiet but intense, handled most of the digging and burning. Grace, a beautiful girl with a shy smile, known for singing as she prepared food. Eliza, the youngest, who was often seen playing with children before they vanished. Each had their assigned roles. The sons handled the bodies. The daughters kept the guests comfortable. But all participated in the killings. This wasn't spontaneous violence. It was structured, ritualistic, calculated. The process often followed the same steps. One welcome and feeding, guests were offered food, rest, and religious comfort. Miriam would select a tincture depending on the group, some to sedate, others to paralyze. 2. Assessment. Elijah would ask questions during prayer. Where are you from? Who's expecting you? Are you traveling alone? They targeted the most isolated and vulnerable. 3. Separation. Children were separated from adults under the pretense of rest or prayer. One would be taken at a time. 4. Execution. Some died by poison, others by smothering or strangulation. Those who resisted were subdued and killed by the sons. 5. Disposal. Bodies were buried beneath the church or in the graves of mercy, shallow pits behind the garden. Belongings were stripped and logged. They even kept a ledger, a leather-bound book hidden in a false-bottom drawer in Elijah's study. It contained dates, names, family sizes, and notes of passage. Some entries were as cold as June 12th for travelers. 2 adults, 2 boys. Claimed no kin east. Tools and goods recovered. Prayer complete. Others were chilling in their false piety. March 4th, widow and infant. Child spared discomfort. Souls delivered. In their minds, they weren't just killing people. They were liberating them, cleansing them, sending them to a better place before the corrupted world could poison them. Some locals who traded with the chapel noticed strange things, tools that didn't match Elijah's story, women's boots being sold as donations, or silverware engraved with unfamiliar initials. But nothing stuck. The Graysons were too respected, too careful. No one dared accuse them. After all, they were just a family of faith in a lonely part of the world, offering kindness in a land known for cruelty. But the kindness was bait. The hymns were a lullaby, and the prayers were a death sentence. In the fall of 1892, 5 years after the Grayson family vanished from the Oregon Territory, a young surveyor named James Leary was hired to map the now abandoned land near the Columbia River. The chapel, long forgotten and half swallowed by brush, stood quiet and sun-bleached, its cross broken, its windows clouded with grime. Leary wasn't looking for trouble. All he needed was a place to camp. He broke the rusted lock on the chapel door and stepped inside, and what he found changed everything. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a rural 1800s church. Pews covered in dust, hymnals stacked neatly on a sagging pulpit, a wooden cross above the altar. But Leary, a seasoned woodsman, noticed something odd almost immediately. The floorboards felt soft, unstable. They shifted as he walked, and the air, it was foul, thick with something rotting, something old. He pried up a warped plank. Then another. What he saw beneath would haunt him for the rest of his life. Beneath the floor was a hidden chamber, no more than 5 feet deep, running the length of the chapel. Inside, bones, hundreds of them, jutted from the packed earth like jagged teeth. Skulls with cracked jaws, tiny ribs, entire skeletons partially preserved by the dry ground. Children, women, men, layered over each other like firewood, buried in haste, without ceremony. And worse, many showed signs of violence. Fractured skulls, knife marks, bindings still clinging to wrists. These weren't peaceful deaths. These were executions. Leary fled. Within 2 days, a team of lawmen and investigators from nearby settlements arrived. What followed was one of the largest and most gruesome discoveries in frontier American history. The basement and surrounding grounds contained the remains of over 800 people. Some had been buried, others burned. A few, possibly children, were simply hidden in crates beneath the pulpit, their skeletal remains still curled in defensive positions. There was no doubt these were victims. And this was a killing ground. Inside the chapel, the investigators also found a locked cabinet behind the altar. Within it, wrapped in oilcloth, were journals and ledgers. Elijah Grayson's personal writings, preserved in shocking detail. The entries were chilling. June 1863, family of 6. One child refused to sleep, deemed unruly, cleansed with cord. October 1870, soldiers from Missouri, armed. One resisted, buried without rites. February 1879, pregnant woman, claimed to carry a prophet. Miriam insisted on full sacrifice. Each victim was accounted for with emotionless precision, dates, names if known, belongings taken, and biblical justification scribbled in the margins. One page stood out, more recent than the others. Dated July 12, 1887, it read, "We are no longer safe. They whisper. They suspect. God's work is nearly done. One more harvest. Then we shall vanish into the soil and await his return." That harvest, authorities suspected, was their final mass killing before the Graysons disappeared for good. But even more horrifying was what they found in the chapel's garden. Beneath rows of wilted vegetables and decaying rose bushes, investigators unearthed shallow graves, dozens of them. Markers fashioned from branches and stone bore nothing but initials. Some were freshly dug. A few had still decaying flesh inside. In one corner, they found a well filled with bones, as if the family had run out of space. The press descended on the area, calling it the Chapel of Bones. Newspapers described the scene in morbid detail. Public outrage exploded. People demanded answers. How could a family murder hundreds and go undetected for 30 years? The answer was simple. No one ever questioned the church. No one ever questioned faith. That blind trust had allowed a family to build their own temple of death in plain sight, and no one had dared to look beneath the floorboards. Until it was far, far too late. By the time the truth about Sacred Heart Chapel emerged in 1892, it was already too late. For over 30 years, the Grayson family had carried out one of the most methodical and large-scale serial killings in American history, and yet not a single local report, journal entry, or law enforcement record ever questioned them during that time. How? The answer was simple and terrifying. No one suspected them because no one ever suspects the faithful. In a time when religion was seen as both moral compass and community lifeline, questioning a man of God was practically unthinkable, especially in the lawless frontier. Preachers were treated with reverence, their homes with respect. A chapel was seen as the safest place west of the Mississippi. Elijah Grayson understood this better than anyone. He wore it like armor. Travelers along the Oregon Trail were exhausted, starving, sick, or grieving. By the time they stumbled upon Sacred Heart Chapel, they were ready to believe in anything that promised rest or relief. The Graysons didn't need to chase victims. The victims came to them willingly, singing hymns and thanking them with tears in their eyes. And then they vanished. No one came looking for them because the Oregon Trail was already a graveyard. Death from dysentery, raids, starvation, and accidents was common. Entire families could disappear, and no one would know the difference. The Graysons didn't just exploit the trail, they used it as cover. But locals nearby had suspicions. Small things. Farmers trading with the chapel noticed the Grayson family always had extra supplies, canned goods, medicine, clothing, but claimed not to receive regular deliveries. Visitors occasionally mentioned strange behavior. Grayson's tendency to ask deeply personal questions, Miriam's cold silence when children cried, or the odd way the daughters would sing lullabies even when no children were present. And yet, no one dared speak. Why? Because Elijah Grayson was not just feared, he was respected. He baptized local children, prayed over the sick, and offered sermons in nearby towns when traveling pastors were delayed. He was seen as a holy man doing God's work in the wilderness. To accuse him, even privately, would have been to accuse God himself. And when settlers did start to talk, they were often silenced by fear. One surviving journal entry from a blacksmith's wife in 1885 read, "There's something wrong up there. The preacher's eyes don't match his words. But my husband says to keep quiet. He says that accusing a man of the cloth could bring ruin." Another entry, found in a local sheriff's records, never officially filed, said, "Grayson has strange items in his trade, things no preacher should carry. Tools, boots, a rifle that looked army-issued. But if I ask questions, I become the enemy. Better to stay clear." This chilling silence, this collective denial, gave the Graysons exactly what they needed: time. And as long as no one questioned the pile of missing names, they were free to keep cleansing the land. But even after the Graysons vanished and the truth came out, the land remained tainted. Locals began calling it dead ground. Hunters refused to cross through the forest near the old chapel. Stories of ghostly figures, especially of a pale woman in a bloodstained bonnet and a child holding a hymn book, became part of Oregon folklore. Some say you can still hear sermons echoing through the trees if you stand in the ruins of the chapel at twilight. Others claim the names of the dead still rise to the surface of the soil after rainstorms, like ink bleeding from the earth. Paranormal investigators who've dared enter the area report nausea, hallucinations, voices whispering scripture backwards, and the sensation of being watched from behind even in total silence. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery came in 1946, when a pair of archaeologists uncovered a sealed stone vault beneath the old garden. Inside were children's toys, small bones, and a handwritten note signed simply, "He has not returned. We wait still." No one knows if it was written by Elijah, Miriam, or one of the children. But the implication is clear. The Graysons weren't done. They believed in something darker than justice, darker than faith, and they believed that one day their work would resume, perhaps by another hand, in another chapel, under another cross. And that's why, to this day, the people of that region tell their children, if you see a church in the woods, keep walking. The Sacred Heart Chapel is gone now, at least what was left of it. In 1935, almost half a century after the remains of over 800 people were discovered beneath the floorboards, the state finally authorized the site's destruction. Bulldozers arrived. Workers tore down the rotting walls, pulled up the warped pews, and scattered the last of the Graysons' twisted temple to the wind. But something stayed behind. Not long after the demolition began, the crew started to report strange events. One man claimed his bulldozer died every time he pointed it toward the pulpit. Another, a man who had uncovered the mass grave beneath the rose garden, disappeared for 3 days and was later found wandering barefoot in the woods, muttering hymns that no one could identify. Local newspapers called it superstition. Locals called it justice. Even now, the chapel site remains untouched. Every attempt to develop or farm the land has failed. Machinery breaks. Crops die. Animals refuse to graze. No one owns the property anymore. It's officially marked as uninhabitable land on county records, and some maps don't show it at all. But those who live nearby, they know. They say the fog there is different, thicker, heavier, like it hides something. Hikers who stray too close to the tree line report hearing faint voices, always singing softly, always in unison. Some claim to have seen a young girl in white standing among the trees, barefoot, holding a hymnal, her face turned away. Some believe the spirits of the victims are still trapped there, bound to the place their trust was betrayed. Others think the Graysons never truly left, that their souls remain tethered to the ground, waiting for a chance to continue their work. And there are those who believe it already has. In 1991, a small, independent church was built nearly 20 miles from the original chapel site. Within a year, it was abandoned. According to the local sheriff's department, the congregation began to report visions, including a man in black robes walking through the sanctuary at night, and children hearing voices telling them to come to the garden. The building was later burned in a fire that was never officially explained. In 2014, an amateur ghost hunting group spent the night near the ruins of the Sacred Heart Chapel. One member never made it home. Her camera was found days later, resting on a tree stump near the site. The footage showed her walking toward the clearing alone, whispering, "I hear them singing." The final seconds of the video captured a sound that no one has ever fully explained, a creaking wooden door swinging open, followed by a man's voice saying, "Welcome home, child." To this day, no trace of her body has ever been found. And so, the story of the Graysons and the chapel they built remains one of the most disturbing, unsolved horrors in American history. Not because we don't know who did it, but because we let them do it. Faith, fear, and silence created the perfect conditions for evil to thrive. The Graysons were not just a murderous family. They were a symbol of how belief can be used to manipulate, to control, and ultimately, to destroy. That's the real legacy of the Sacred Heart Chapel. It's not just the bodies in the ground. It's the reminder that monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear collars. They hold Bibles. They speak softly, and they smile. So if you ever find yourself wandering near the Columbia River, and you see a small wooden cross rising from the mist, don't stop. Don't look. And whatever you do, don't listen if you hear someone singing. Because not all ghosts haunt buildings. Some haunt faith itself.